You ever notice how guys will research a graphics card for 6 weeks before buying it, but won't spend 5 minutes looking into therapy even when their life is falling apart? We'll optimize our code, our workouts, our portfolios. Hell, I know guys who've spent more time researching which protein powder to buy than they've spent thinking about their mental health in the last decade. We'll debug a piece of software for hours, methodically going through stack traces and error logs. But when it comes to our own psychological patterns, suddenly we're not analytical anymore. We're just stuck. Here's the thing, though. The guys who actually do go to therapy, they report some pretty surprising findings, and I mean that literally. There's research on what happens when analytical men finally sit down with a professional. The results might change how you think about the whole thing. Because it turns out, therapy for logical minds works completely differently than you probably imagine. This is actually why I built the council.chat, because most of us analytical guys want feedback on our thinking patterns, but we want it from something that actually understands how our minds work. The council isn't therapy. It's like having 9 advisors who know your personality type and remember your conversation history. You take a real personality assessment, then chat with advisors who push back on your logic instead of just validating everything you say. One always plays devil's advocate. Another focuses on practical solutions. They remember what you told them last week. And they're designed specifically for people who overthink everything and want actual analysis, not feel-good platitudes. When you go to thecouncil.chat, you'll see the landing page with all 9 council members. Each has a different expertise and perspective. The personality calibration takes about 2 minutes, no credit card required. Then you can start getting the kind of honest feedback most AI tools won't give you. The council.chat, link in the description. So why don't analytical guys go to therapy? The obvious answers are usually wrong. It's not just men don't talk about feelings or toxic masculinity. Those explanations are too simple. The real resistance comes from 3 specific patterns that researchers at UC Berkeley identified when they studied therapy utilization among different personality types. First, control aversion. If you're used to debugging your own problems, the idea of sitting in a room while someone else drives the conversation feels fundamentally wrong. You want to understand the system, not just follow someone else's process. It's like being forced to use someone else's IDE when you have your own perfectly customized setup. Second, outcome uncertainty. We want to know what we're optimizing for. Better mental health isn't specific enough. What metrics are we tracking? What does success look like? How long until we see results? If someone told you to refactor your code base but wouldn't tell you what the performance targets were, you'd think they were insane. Third, stigma isn't about weakness, it's about competence. We don't want to be the guy who couldn't figure out his own psychology. That feels like admitting you're bad at pattern recognition, which for analytical minds is basically admitting you're bad at thinking. Let me give you some concrete examples of how this plays out. Jake is a software engineer. His relationship is falling apart. He's having panic attacks before code reviews, and he's been doom-scrolling Reddit until 2 a.m. every night for 3 months. But instead of getting help, he's convinced he can optimize his way out of it. He tries different productivity apps, meditation timers, sleep tracking devices. He's treating the symptoms like individual bugs instead of recognizing there's a systemic issue. Or take Marcus, a finance guy. He can model complex derivatives, but he can't figure out why he gets irrationally angry every time his wife asks him about his day. He's convinced it's just stress, just workload, just market volatility. He'll spend hours analyzing why a stock moved 2%, but won't spend 10 minutes analyzing why a simple question makes him want to punch a wall. These aren't isolated cases. I see this pattern everywhere. We're pattern recognition machines until the pattern is our own behavior. Then suddenly we develop selective blindness. Here's what's interesting, though. There's a study from Stanford that followed tech workers who started therapy. The researchers tracked not just mood improvements but cognitive changes, and the results were counterintuitive. The biggest benefit wasn't emotional regulation, it was metacognition, thinking about thinking. These guys got better at recognizing their own cognitive biases, decision-making patterns, and mental models. They basically learned to debug their own psychology. One participant said therapy was like code review for your brain. Another described it as pair programming with your emotional patterns. The therapist becomes like a senior developer helping you refactor messy psychological code. And here's the kicker. The analytical guys who stuck with therapy reported that it improved their problem-solving at work. They got better at systems thinking. Better at identifying root causes instead of just treating symptoms. Better at understanding human behavior in team dynamics. One guy said he finally understood why his team meetings were always disasters. It wasn't the agenda or the timing, it was that he was pattern matching everyone's contributions to his own mental models instead of actually listening to what they were saying. But the real breakthrough happens when you stop thinking about therapy as fixing something broken and start thinking about it as optimizing a complex system. Your brain is the most sophisticated system you'll ever work with. It has patterns, feedback loops, edge cases, technical debt from childhood experiences. Most of us would never try to optimize a distributed system without monitoring and expert input, but we expect to optimize our psychology with zero external feedback. That's not logical, that's pride. Think about it this way. You wouldn't try to improve your code without version control, code reviews, or testing frameworks. But somehow we think we can improve our mental performance without any external validation or feedback loops. The therapists who work well with analytical men understand this. They don't just say, "How does that make you feel?" They say, "I notice you always catastrophize about work scenarios, but never about technical problems. What's different about those two categories in your mental model?" They use frameworks. They explain the why behind techniques. They help you build mental models instead of just telling you what to feel. It becomes collaborative problem solving instead of one-way advice giving, and that changes everything. So what do you actually do with this information? If you're thinking about therapy but hitting mental resistance, try reframing it with this 3-step approach. First, define your optimization goals. Don't go in with "I want to be happier." That's like saying, "I want my app to be better." Be specific. "I want to reduce decision paralysis when choosing between equally valid options. I want to stop catastrophizing about work presentations. I want to understand why I procrastinate on important tasks but can hyper-focus on random side projects. I want to figure out why I can manage a team of engineers but can't have a difficult conversation with my partner." Write these down like user stories, make them measurable. Second, research like you would any other service. Look for therapists who work with analytical people. Ask about their approach. Do they use CBT, which is basically debugging thought patterns? Do they understand personality frameworks like Myers-Briggs or Big Five? Can they explain their methodology? Do they work with other engineers, researchers, or analytical professionals? You want someone who won't be confused when you describe your thoughts as processes or your emotions as background threads. Third, treat the first few sessions as a trial period. You're evaluating fit, not committing to years of weekly sessions. Most analytical guys who try this approach report that therapy feels less like talking about feelings and more like consulting on personal optimization. Let me address some misconceptions that keep analytical guys away from therapy. Misconception 1. Therapy is just venting. Actual therapy is structured problem solving. Good therapists use evidence-based frameworks like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is literally about identifying and debugging thought patterns. Misconception 2. Therapists will just validate everything I say. A good therapist will challenge your assumptions and point out inconsistencies in your thinking. They're like rubber duck debugging, but the duck talks back and has a PhD in human psychology. Misconception 3. I should be able to figure this out myself. You wouldn't build a compiler from scratch just to avoid using existing tools. Psychology is the same way. There are established patterns, frameworks, and debugging techniques that took decades to develop. Using them isn't cheating. It's efficient. Misconception 4. Therapy takes forever. Most cognitive improvements happen in the first 12-16 sessions. That's like a 3-month code sprint to optimize your mental performance for the rest of your life. Pretty good ROI. I want to share some real examples of what happens when analytical guys actually try this. David, a machine learning engineer, went to therapy because he was having panic attacks during technical interviews. Turns out, he was running a background process that constantly evaluated his competence based on whether he could answer every possible question perfectly. His therapist helped him realize this was like trying to pre-compute every possible input instead of building robust error handling. 6 months later, he not only stopped having panic attacks, but he became better at technical discussions because he wasn't wasting mental resources on catastrophizing. Another guy, Alex, went because his marriage was failing. He's a systems architect who could design elegant solutions for complex problems, but he couldn't understand why his wife was randomly upset all the time. Through therapy, he learned that humans have emotional APIs just like software systems do. Once he started treating emotional intelligence like a technical skill to develop, everything clicked. He began to see patterns in communication breakdowns, implemented better error handling in conversations, and actually saved his marriage by applying systems thinking to human relationships. Here's why this matters more than just personal optimization, though. There's emerging research on what psychologists call analytical empathy. When highly logical people learn to understand their own emotional patterns, they don't just get better at managing themselves, they get dramatically better at understanding others. They start seeing human behavior as systems instead of random chaos. They become better managers, better partners, better friends, not because they become more emotional, but because they become more accurate at reading emotional data. Think about the best tech leaders you know. They're not just good at technical architecture, they understand human architecture. They can predict how their team will react to changes. They know when someone is burned out before that person even realizes it themselves. They can design processes that account for human psychology, not just technical requirements. This isn't soft skills. This is advanced systems thinking applied to human behavior. And that's a superpower in a world where most people are terrible at understanding human behavior. The guys who figure this out early have a massive advantage in every area of life that involves other humans, which is basically every area of life that matters. Look, you're going to optimize something today. Maybe it's your morning routine, your workflow, your investment strategy, your development environment. But the highest ROI optimization you can make is probably understanding how your own mind actually works. And the fastest way to do that is getting external feedback from someone who knows what they're looking at, whether that's therapy, coaching, or just having honest conversations with smart people who aren't afraid to call out your patterns. The Counsel at the Counsel chat is designed for exactly this, giving analytical people the kind of honest, pattern-based feedback that actually helps you see your blind spots. Because the biggest bug in your system is usually the one you can't see. And unlike every other system you work with, you can't just restart your brain when it starts acting weird. You have to